Okay, welcome back. So next up, we'll have Andy Reid from the University of Strathclyde, who's going to tell us how insects can inspire the design of microphones. So Andy, welcome up.
So hi, as I said, I'm Andy Reid, and I've spent most of my career at Strathclyde studying how insects communicate and then trying to build microphones and then lately 3D print microphones that are based on the kind of fundamental principles of insect hearing. And usually the first thing people ask me after I tell them this, after the blank stare in their face, is why? So insects do a number of really fantastic things. They can do sound localization with just one membrane. So as opposed to what Tim was just describing about using 4 microphone arrays to capture the direction of sound, animals like the fly Omnia cracea can do it with just one pair of coupled tympanum that are 500 microns across, 500 microns apart. They can do frequency separation, tonotopy, we call that, which is very much like the human cochlea. They will separate sound into frequency bands and then be able to process them individually. But the key point about all of these types of hearing is its mechanical filtering. Biology and natural systems don't do signal processing. We can't do filtering after the fact. So everything has to happen at the material level for these insects. You're always having to get energy to a point because the only encoding we have from the nerve cells is a pulse train. It's just a spike train like that the most can give you the amplitude of the signal that's being directed. So you've got to get energy to a point first. And a good way to illustrate that, I think this was not my PhD, this was the PhD of the guy who was sitting next to me, which looked far more fascinating than mine. So I spent a lot of time looking at this. This is the locust ear. This is an ear that's about 2.5 millimeters across, and it separates sound into 4 frequency bands. And it does this by means of this nice traveling wave that you see down here on the bottom left-hand corner. The wave actually slows down, and it slows down at a different rate for different frequencies as it moves from the thin part of the tympanum to the thick part of the tympanum, and it stops, therefore, at different parts of the tympanum. And each of those parts has got a special sensor cell attached to it. So this is very similar to the way that the cochlea works, but it's a much simpler system. It works with only 4 frequency bands. The cochlea works with about 20,000. We've got incredibly sophisticated hearing. But we do, and it's all done by the mechanics, the actual material of this tympanum. How it does that, we don't know quite yet. There's been a number of competing models. You can try modeling this as a simple plate. You get the energy in the right places over there in the top right, but you don't get the traveling wave. You don't get that slow down of the wave that leads to that shoaling behavior like a wave coming into shore. You can model it as a kind of tension membrane. There's a guy, Robert Malkin over at University of Bristol did that. He had to increase the size somewhat to make it do that. And you get the slowdown of the wave, but you don't get the frequency separation. And then people started discovering these network of pores within the membrane itself, which is a hydrogel, and then there's all sorts of complicated modeling that comes in. There's multi-scale acoustic effects, the geological engineers involved. And more importantly, we don't actually know what the material properties, we can't even measure the Young's modulus of this membrane, which is going to vary hugely, millimeter by millimeter, micron by micron. So we kind of avoided that problem. We started doing the simpler models. So my idea was we were going to make models of these insects using 3D printing technology. We tried doing it in silicon at first, and there's a number of papers I've tried doing Ormia microphones in silicon, but it doesn't work quite so well because you can't do that thickness variation, and the microphones have to be open-faced, so you get a lot of sound loss as it goes around the outside. So this, I think claims of primacy are frowned upon in academia, so this is I'm absolutely not claiming this is the world's first fully 3D printed microphone. It's not that, but if other people want to say that, that's fine. This was created using a piezoelectric sensing system. So we've got fully 3D printed piezoelectric layers and conductive layers that were all integrated into one print. And you don't see the actual gradation in the membrane like this because we're talking about variations in thickness that are about 8 to 50 microns in size, or 50 to 150. And these are intended to mimic well-researched systems like ORMIA that can direct the direction of sound coming in. The trouble with these kind of piezoelectric systems, and we've tried other things as well, we've tried capacitive and electric designs, is that in order to keep the piezoelectric material as flexible as possible, so we can replicate the insect hearing system, it has a very low piezoelectric coefficient. It doesn't produce that much sound. So we've been working on that problem for a long time, and one of the solutions we've come up recently is creating porous materials. And this is a templated method that I like to pretend is very sophisticated, but it's actually sugar templated. So this is done by taking baking sugar and adding it to our resin mix, and then we polymerize it and boil it, and it brings out the holes, and we create this nice porous polymer material that we can 3D print. And when we put the piezoelectric material in that, and we suddenly get this huge jump in the piezoelectric coefficient and the coupling. And I'll show you down here, this is it modeling an acoustic emission test and a high voltage transmission cable. And that's it compared to the PVDF. It's got about 2-3 times the bare PVDF. But that's a templated method. It's not that sophisticated. What we've just started learning to do is doing controlled non-templated porosity. By adding methanol, to our resin mix, we can increase or decrease the porosity by changing the UV light content of the signal as the polymer solidifies. And that allows us, by changing the gradient of that UV filter, to change the gradient of the porosity. And now I've got a material that I know the material properties of. I can control the porosity through the thickness of the membrane. And what I want to do is try and use that to understand how that LOCUST membrane will work in real life, and hopefully start generating microphones that can do signal separation of more than the 10 bands that a cochlear implant can do currently, maybe up to 20 or 100 bands. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll start off with a question that's kind of, I think, how you were ending. How do you hope these microphones and that kind of new technology will be used?
So the big thing about this technology is it's so very low power. It's low power and low bandwidth, because you don't need to have a continuous time recording signal, you don't need to sample, you don't have the energy costs of post-processing, things like that. It's an event-driven system, so links in with neuromorphic programming. So it's basically useful for anywhere that you can't get to easily, and it's got to run off of battery or something for a very, very long time. So I think mainly about subsea applications at the moment. Some other people think about things that are implanted into the body. Maybe, if we're going to another planet, that might be a good idea if you want it to run for a very long time. They've got a big battery, though, I believe, in the landers, so that might not be the best idea for them. But somewhere where you need to run something for a long time with very little power and very little data output, very reduced data output.
Some questions from the audience?
Are these able to be waterproofed? Because you're talking different environments and low power, which is, the crux of deep water, CTBTO. So I'm wondering what this porosity does, or these materials would do underwater. Would you just coat them in something like a normal HTI Min is now, or can they go underwater as is?
No, they can go underwater as is. We've had one with the ion gels. Now, as we said, they can go underwater as is. The preamplifier can't. So yes, so if you get the porous matrix filled with water, then you can match the material to the surrounding medium, and you avoid the insertion loss that way. In theory, I've got a student at the moment working on that. We haven't got the results from that yet.
Thank you. We have one question from the virtual audience for this. Oh, two, but the first one is from Rick Lovett. And his question is, what are the practical uses of this? Is it mostly just for hearing aids?
Yeah, hearing aids would be one of the ones we've got at the moment. But essentially, if you want to have sound direction, one of the first problems I worked with was a military application. It was counter-sniper detection systems. And the idea is that if you are fired upon, you generally want to know where the shooter is coming from. In fact, during the first Iraq War, Donald Rumsfeld asked the military to develop one of these counter-sniper localization systems, and they came up with the boomerang system, which is about 2-meter wide microphone array that's mounted in the Humvee, and will tell you roughly what type of ordnance is being fired and where it's being fired from. So the idea is, with a system like this, you can do that directionality with 1 or 2 very small microphones, not the need for that big array with a big spacing between them, and they can be mounted or worn by a soldier, something like that. The only trouble is it gives you a relative position to where the microphone is facing. So I think we generally ask the soldiers if they wouldn't mind standing stock still facing due north while they're being fired upon. That makes the system work a lot better. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. One question from Ben Schwann is this commercially viable at this point, or at some point, or how many years out are we looking?
Yeah. He's put his finger on the nub of the problem there. This is generation after next technology. I've been working on this for 10 years, and I've mainly been doing pure biological research to understand the insect communication systems. I'm only now just getting to TRL level 0. So we're talking about another 10 years at least for this to be commercially viable. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll be back in 1 minute with our next presenter.